You're listening to the TV Obsessive channel, presented by TVObsessive.com. Okay, welcome back to the TV Obsessive podcast. As always, I'm Cameron Crane, the executive editor of TVObsessive.com, joined by Ryan Kirksey, writer and contributor for the site. How are you doing today, Ryan?
I'm doing great, Cameron. Doing really great. Excited to be back talking about Winning Time again. Going through some other things we're interested in. This is going to be a good one. I think you and I have a lot of thoughts on this episode coming up. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, I know. But things going okay for you? Spent any time in an ice bath lately?
No ice bath. I've wondered about. I've never done an ice bath ever. Have you?
Never. I've attempted to when it's 110 degrees outside here in Texas, but never have done it.
I've taken cold showers, like
Yeah.
very big, either because the hot water was out, or there was one time then when it was like this heat wave and I didn't have air conditioning, and at like 3 a.m, I literally thought I was like gonna die or something. And this is in New York City, so it was like, even though it was dark, it didn't really cool down. It'd been over 100 degrees for 5 days, where I took a cold shower. So like I could see that. I could see, but it seems like it'd be very cold to actually have an ice bath.
Yeah, you would be uncomfortably cold. I mean, piercing cold, I think. So no thanks. Not for me.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so yeah, things are going pretty well. It's August 15th. As always, we kind of keep an eye on what's going on in the news. So we'll hit a couple items here before we get into winning time. What caught your eye this week, Ryan?
Yeah, I caught a THR article this week that I found interesting, and the title of this article is "Linear TV Falls Below 50% of Viewing for the First Time." And so I read through this, and it basically talks about how linear TV, basically network TV and cable TV combined, for the first time in a month-long period, totaled less than 50% of all the TV viewing. And I guess my first thought was, really, it took this long?
Yeah,
I guess I would have thought that it would happen sooner, but as we've talked about before, there are a lot of people still tuning in to network TV these days, I guess.
yeah, it's interesting because regular listeners of the podcast will note that last week, I think I was saying, hey, I kind of want to look up how many people still watch cable. Oh, here you go. Um,
Yeah.
a new study. This is combining, I think, cable with broadcast. I don't know. That would be an interesting number. How many people out there don't even have cable and just have an antenna hooked up to their TV and in 2023? Probably
I'm sure
some.
they're out there, but yeah.
Of course, you need like an HD antenna at this point. I looked into that the one time, however many years ago. They were kind of expensive, relatively. They switched it
Yeah.
so you can't just use rabbit ears like you used to, because
Right.
it's a digital broadband. So I don't know. I'm not up to speed on that at all. But yeah, interesting that it's dipped below 50%. But also perhaps noteworthy with what we were talking about last week, that it's still that high. I
Yeah.
looked at those numbers, and then the streaming numbers are I think 37 or 38 or something, and then they've got a category for other. So
Yeah.
if we do have some feeling that most people are watching streaming, well, even if you put in the other, which I think is some, like, on demand stuff or whatever, um
Yeah.
maybe half. It's still not, but things do definitely feel to be going in that direction. So
Yeah. The only other thing that stood out for me from that article was apparently last month, 18 billion minutes of the show Suits was played on Netflix. 18 billion minutes. So
yeah, this is
we talked about that
astounding.
phenomenon a little bit a couple weeks ago, but
this
that thing is
is
just going crazy.
this is just astounding. Have you ever watched Suits?
I've never seen it. No.
I watched maybe like the first 4 seasons of Suits at one point, and this was a while ago because that was all that was out. So
Yeah.
I can relate to this phenomenon to the extent that the show is imminently bingeable. Like, I'll give people that, because this was however long ago it was when there were only 4 seasons of Suits that had been released. It was on
Yeah.
Amazon Prime or something, I think. And I just sat there and I just binged through the 4 seasons. But it was one of these shows where I never thought it was good enough that I found myself thinking, "Oh, when's the next season come out? I've got to be on top of
Yeah.
the next season."
Yeah.
But yeah, Meghan Markle's in that show.
That's right. I think that's driving some of this.
Yeah, I think that is, but it's weird. It's weird. How many of us had watched Suits beforehand? Because that was my experience. It was like, oh, he's marrying Meghan Markle from Suits, the show that purports to be in New York City, but was clearly filmed in Toronto or Montreal or something. Like it's clearly not filmed in New York City. Absolutely 100% not filmed in New York City. But
Yeah.
it's kind of entertaining. It's kind of entertaining for
Yeah, but you're right. It's still at least about 50% of people are just plugging their way through network and cable. So they'll that content will keep coming as well. So anyway,
yeah.
so that was something that just stuck out to me.
Yeah, so I mean, to tie this back into our ongoing coverage of the strikes,
Yeah.
that's a seg we can make, I guess, because equally, I saw something where, yeah, Suits has these huge streaming numbers, and the writers are getting practically nothing because their deals are not set up.
Yeah.
Like they'd be getting way more money if this was rerunning on USA, the cable network, and people were watching it on USA, the cable network, because they have that residual structure. Um, Apparently, there was a meeting with the WGA on Friday.
Yeah.
I don't know if something might happen that I think we should take it with a grain of salt. There's a Variety article that's out, but I'm hearing from the other side, the WGA side, that it's supposed to be a media blackout, and some people are saying like, "Hey, the studios are leaking this," to try to make it sound like they made a good offer. So we'll see. We're waiting for the WGA's assessment of whatever offer was made, which I guess some offer was made.
Yeah.
And there was at least enough so that they could have this Variety article that says the offer makes some effort to address all of the items, which would be a new development.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a bad offer. We
Yeah.
don't know yet. It's like, oh yeah, we'll give you residuals on Netflix streaming. How does 1/1,000,000th of a cent per view sound? Like it's
Well, this may be a theme of our episode today, using the media as a weapon. We're going to get to that in our winning time, but that sounds like what may be happening here, based on at least some of the social media uh, commentary that you can see right now from the different sides.
Yeah, I think they're trying to some extent, but at the same time, with a grain of salt, if they made a counter that actually addresses all the items, that does seem like a positive development. So, we'll see where this goes. They announced that they moved the Emmys to January, which is interesting. It's interesting to me that they're saying a date at all.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. The other thing I wanted to mention, we've been hitting on, people who've unfortunately passed away. Johnny Hardwick this past week, but maybe it was actually like a full week ago, but we got the news after we recorded our last pod. This would be the voice of Dale Gribble, King of the Hill. Now, Ryan, I know you're from Texas. You fan of King of the Hill?
I haven't watched King of the Hill. It's been more of a sporadic thing than a binge or a consistent thing for me. But we have a pretty in our family, we have a pretty famous King of the Hill quote that we toss around, which is when Hank's wife takes him out to one of the buffets, and he's just piling his plate full of meat, and she says, "You have to get something that's a vegetable." And so he reluctantly agrees and throws some macaroni and cheese on there. That's sort of how
like you already cheated.
well, we felt seen down here in Texas when that one came on.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I love the show personally.
Yeah.
I caught it here and there, and then it was in 2020. I watched it all, during lockdown. There have been talks that there's going to be a revival, and apparently they recorded a couple of episodes. So it's part of why I wanted to hit on this. I mean, it's quite sad that Johnny Hardwick died, obviously, but then also, do you proceed with a revival without Dale Gribble? I can hardly imagine, because
Yeah.
particularly,
It's funny you say that because there are all these voice properties that seem to continue forever, long after people have passed away, whether it's whether it's the Muppets or Star Wars or other things. But I don't know, just trying to find a real replacement for Dale and King of the Hill seems maybe a bridge too far.
yeah, I mean, I suppose you could. It's one way you could go. I'm
Yeah.
presuming, I mean, Brittany Murphy died way,
Yeah.
quite a long time ago, like right when the show was ending, so I guess I've been presuming that the new show would just not have Luann in it. It's possible that they could get another voice
Yeah.
actor. I mean, that is, but I don't know. I mean, there's that. There's some kind of weird question about would it be disrespectful in some
Yeah.
way? Are we disrespecting the dead if we get a new voice actor to be Dale Gribble? Or, is that an outmoded kind of concern or what? Because, of course, they are recasting the voices that Justin Roiland did on Rick and Morty, right?
Oh yes. Oh
But it's
yes.
an entirely different situation. They got rid of that guy,
Definitely.
because of scandal and harassment charges and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, apparently they're saying that they recorded a couple of episodes of this King of the Hill revival, um, and then things aren't happening. I think because of the strike.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
don't know.
I hope it moves forward. I would watch a revival of that, but I guess it's with all of these confluence of events, it's kind of wait and see mode right now for that show.
Yeah, but man,
Yeah.
I want Dale because I don't know if you thought about this, but like Dale Gribble always had that kind of conspiratorial mind, you know.
Yep.
So I think that he would provide in King of the Hills context a really um fascinating entry point into some of the stuff that's been going on.
Yeah.
Like I kind of want to know Dale Gribble's opinions about QAnon. You know what I'm saying? And
It
so
is a show that ended before we really needed it.
yeah, it'd be a shame if we get King of the Hill without Dale Gribble, but it also wouldn't quite feel right to me if they recast the voice actor. So I don't know, something to keep an eye on long
Yeah.
term. But
Well, another thing to keep in mind is that much like the characters in this show, The Walking Dead is never ever going to end. I don't know if you are aware of this. There is a fifth show on the
yeah,
way that's coming in September. Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. I don't know if this is the one where he tours the country on his motorcycle with zombies right along with him, or what. If that was a different show or
yeah.
what. But there's the Daryl Dixon show, and then there's another show coming, the Rick and Michonne show, sometime in 2024. So this once again is the show that never dies.
Yeah, I think they announced a whole slate of
Yeah.
we want, and I'm not. We talked about this before. Not really a fan of the show. If people are,
Oh yeah.
I hope these are good, and I hope you enjoy them. And I'm
Yeah, I
I'm
think if we saw
envious to some degree.
correctly, there is a page dedicated to the franchise. There's something like more than 300 episodes of this show in its entirety, right? Amongst all the different properties, 6 announced shows, and the guy who runs the property that is The Walking Dead said that there are many more to come. So we are not close apparently to being done with Walking Dead, but these shows do well and have quite the zombie horde following, as best I can
Yeah,
tell.
it's interesting. I mean, so are these prequel shows? Is that what's going on?
No, these two that are coming out. Well, the one that came out last month, the Dead City, which took place in New York City, the Daryl Dixon, and then the Rick and Michonne show are all spinoffs of the main Walking Dead franchise.
Okay,
Yeah.
Fear the Walking Dead is a prequel. I haven't watched I've watched one season of The Walking Dead. I watched the first season and decided that I didn't like it. So
Yeah. No, like I said, I think I've mentioned this. I didn't make it through the last couple of seasons, but I mean, hey, good for them and good for their audience. It's the content that keeps on giving.
yeah, absolutely. So what have you been watching lately? You're still doing Star Wars?
Yeah, so I'm geared up. We've I think written in stone now that I'm gonna to track Masoka for the site for tvobsessive.com when it comes out and just over a week from now. Starts on
Right.
August 23rd. So I'm halfway through the Star Wars Rebels series, preparing for that. Revisiting the turn of the century prequels as well, just to prep myself for sort of this headspace. Star Wars is a tough thing to write about it, so I'm going to do it not tentatively, but I'm going to do it cautiously because there is a lot of things to consider. So I'm still preparing with Rebels. And then I'm looking forward to actually tonight, second episode of Hard Knocks comes out. Are you a Hard Knocks watcher on HBO?
Yeah. So send you off there, right? I watched last week's episode. I've never really watched Hard Knocks before. I've been aware of it. So I guess they're sucking me in with the New York Jets,
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers intrigue, and the news broke yesterday that they are signing Dalvin Cook, and we know that Dalvin Cook visited a couple of weeks ago. So I mean, but yeah, I enjoy it. It's the documentary style. Uh, I used to, when I was a kid, watch these NFL films
Mm,
things that I don't know if they air anymore. They could air the exact things I was watching. They were like going through each Super Bowl.
yeah.
You ever watch any of these?
I've
But it
seen
was
some of these.
like a
Yeah.
short film, like a narrated film. And when I was young, this is how I learned about all of the Super Bowls that happened before I was born and before I started paying attention to football. Um, of course, at that time, you couldn't just like hop on the internet and who won Super Bowl two.
Yeah.
Um, so I have some nostalgia for that, and Hard
Yeah.
Knocks does have a way of feeling.
I will say, having caught that first episode, I don't know what people consider spoilers or not, so I'm just going to avoid all potential.
Spoilers for real life football? I don't
Yeah,
know, man.
for real
Okay,
life football,
all
but
right, fine.
the current voice of the NFL for this show and for other things came and visited the camp and was talking about John Facenda, who was that original voice of NFL films, who's just
Yeah.
so legendary and iconic, and just what an inspiration he was. And I just you used to be able to catch those things on NFL Network, and those are some fascinating, really just really strong looks at the old history of the NFL. So I do
Yeah.
like when they sort of weave all those things together.
I much prefer it. Like I'll turn on NFL Network now, and they'll just rerun games.
Yeah,
I'm not into that. You know what
yeah,
I'm saying? Like, but
yeah,
what I would watch is if you put that effort into producing this kind of narrative, even about like last year's Super Bowl. Like, oh, this is interesting because now you've
yeah,
made it a story.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to the football season. And we both do fantasy football, things like that. I don't want to get too off track since it's a TV podcast.
yeah.
I did put on a little bit of preseason football. I don't know. I always end up doing this and get disappointed. Do you watch the preseason games at all?
I'll check in on things from time to time. Really, if there's just nothing else on or nothing that's that I just want on in the background. I mean, I find things like Hard Knocks to be eminently more enjoyable and dramatic than preseason football. But maybe that's just because like I said, you and I play a lot of fantasy football, and these players that also play in these games don't matter for our fantasy leagues.
Right. Or you want to have an eye on
Yeah,
particular things, but then how do you assess the data? I mean, I'd almost rather just watch the analysis of the preseason games and not the games themselves,
yeah,
because
yeah,
at most you get like, hey, the starters went out there for 8 plays.
yeah,
It's like, okay.
yeah.
But yeah, so that's going on. Season forthcoming here in a couple of weeks. You mentioned you're going to be writing on Ahsoka. I am going to write on Invasion season 2. That starts next week. I guess the same day. There's August 23rd.
Yep, yep.
Um, so I wrote on the first season of that episode by episode. If people watch the show, if you haven't watched the show, you can go watch it. You should know that I had very mixed feelings about the first season, but I'm hooked enough to want to see what happens in season 2. Are you familiar with this show? I mean, like the premise is in the name of the show.
Yeah, the premise, and I've read about it. I only know the details from our conversations about it, and your recommendations of it have been tepid, I guess. So I haven't binged it yet.
It's so weird because I expected it's like, okay, Apple TV Plus is putting out a show called Invasion.
Yeah.
It's about alien invasion.
Mhm.
And I expected it just to be like a rip roaring good time or something, But then it starts out as like really, really, really slow character drama. And I'm the kind of weirdo who loved that. It's like,
Yeah,
oh my God, this show's actually this fascinating kind of portrait of the human condition. You've got these multiple characters in different parts of the world, and they're all on the margins, rather than the show focusing on the government response unit or something like that. And then about halfway through the first season, it just kind of breaks and like all of a sudden kind of turns into that action
yeah.
show I sort of thought it was going to be, but by that point I was disappointed for it to become that. And then by the end of the season, like, oh well, now you actually managed to intrigue me a little bit, Invasion. So I don't know, man. We'll see how season 2 goes.
Okay, well, depending on how you feel about it, I may decide to dive in or not.
Some people really like it. I think in some ways it can't quite decide whether it's a contemplative show or bang bang pew pew action show that you go
Yeah.
along for the ride with, and so we'll see. Maybe it finds its footing a bit more in season 2.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to mention to you, which is I just sort of took HBO's recommendation the other night and threw on this first episode of this 3-part documentary called Telemarketers. Have you seen anything about this so far?
I've seen things about it, but I haven't watched it. It looks kind of fascinating. You check it
It,
out. This was good.
yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, one episode into three parts, so there'll be two more episodes released on Sunday nights, the next 2 Sunday nights. But just the elevator pitch for it is two guys who were involved in this extremely shady telemarketing company spent years documenting it and decide that they want to not only take down this company, but the entire shady telemarketing industry as a whole. And so they spent years doing some things and talking to people, and it's sort of the first episode is sort of sets the stage of where they were and what they were doing and why they decided to come to this conclusion. But the interesting thing is that it's the quality of most of the footage is really quite poor, because it's these guys who just decided back in before 2010 sort of take their own handhelds and cell phone cameras at the time and record stuff that was going on, and that's a lot of what the documentary is. And so it's really low budget, low quality, but the folks that they were able to weave into it with a story that really have put the pieces together have made it a pretty interesting documentary, at least through one. So I'm definitely going to check out the next two. The first one ends on this incredible cliffhanger. And so, yeah, if you're just interested in, why your grandmothers are always getting scammed out of their money, this is a really cool look at how that happens.
Well, yeah, you have to check that out. It seems like it kind of came out of nowhere a little bit. I mean, of course, I'm in the position I'm always trying to keep an eye on what's happening.
Yeah.
I never know with stuff like this. Did I just do a poor job? Did I just miss it?
I missed it too. It just happened to be
Yeah.
on the recommended screen after Hard Knocks, so I threw it on, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I ended up seeing a couple of things about it, like right as it was coming out. So
Yeah.
but yeah, that looks cool. Maybe I'll check that out. All right, man. So about ready to get into winning time?
I am very ready. Let's do it.
All right. So as always, we'll take a little interlude here, and on the other side, we're going to dig into Winning Time Season 2, Episode 2, which is called something like The Magic is Back, because magic is back in this episode. But the magic is whether that's back for the Lakers. I think that's questionable. So anyway, It'll take like 10 seconds, and see you on the other side.
All right, we are back talking about season 2, episode 2 of Winning Time, as Cameron alluded to, titled "The Magic Is Back," and there are multiple layers to that title of the episode. Primarily, this episode covers Magic Johnson's return from a 12-week knee injury, and how that affects chemistry of the team, how people feel after they have been so successful with him away. Sort of a continued dynamic between him and the other players, him and Captain Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We get a lot about the incumbent point guard Norm Nixon and some trade rumors and some unhappiness there. We get our first hints of some tension between head coach Paul Westhead and Pat Riley. I must say, it was pointed out to me, I think at least once last week, I had called him Paul Westfall, who is another NBA coach from later in the next decade. So my apologies there. It's Paul Westhead and Pat Riley.
I unfortunately also realized that. I think after the podcast I think it had gone all the way to being posted. But regardless, it'd be very hard to try to go back and correct the audio. But I realized that I was looking at something else. I was like, oh no, his name's Paul Westhead. We were saying Paul Westfall, and it was in our notes. It was spelled that way in our notes.
Yeah.
So
my mistake there. No offense to Paul Westhead. Paul Westfall comes later. So yeah, we get the first little bits of tension and sort of the cracks in the foundation between these two coaching partners. So generally, that's the summary. Cameron, what'd you think of this episode?
I enjoyed it as always, first of all. I mean, one thing kind of carrying over from last week, let me go and just like shoehorn this in immediately. I wanted to say something about the opening credits, and I kind of didn't manage to get it in last week. And the fact that they reuse, it's the same song, My Favorite Mutiny, from the Coup, Boots Riley, which I do think it's interesting because it feels like a very old school hip hop song, but it's not actually that old, right? But I like the song. But what do you think of this? If you noticed it, they used the same song, but they moved it forward a verse. Did you notice this?
Oh, I didn't pick up on that. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like just a little different because it's season 2. So it's the second verse of the song now instead of the first verse. I don't know. I like these little things like this. And they changed some of the visuals in the opening credits too. Some of them are the same, but they've got some some little differences. I don't know. I just kind of love stuff like that. And personally, I love opening title sequences.
Yeah.
And I like when shows have them, and I never skip them.
So that's the test, right? So and maybe this started back when people learned not to skip the Game of Thrones opening credit because it would always build on the map. But if the show's got a good opening credit title sequence, and you don't want to move past it, that's a good indication you're watching something good.
Indeed. I have this thesis I've had for quite a while. I don't know if it always holds up. I don't know if it holds up in the direction of like if the opening credits are bad, the show's going to be bad. I don't know that it holds up in that direction, but it does. I do think it tends to hold up in the other direction. If the opening credits of the show are good, generally that means that the show is good. I can't think of an example of a show where I felt like, man, love the opening title sequence. It's unfortunate the show kind of sucks.
Yeah. All right, I'm earmarking for some slow news day our favorite title sequence opening credits in a show ever. We're gonna throw that in someday.
I think I did an article on the site that's on the site about this.
Okay.
But we can revisit that because I think I wrote it several years ago. So you're like,
let's
does that list hold? Do other things get in? Stuff's happened since then. Okay, we could do that. We can do like
well, there's a lot of tension created with this episode in various ways. we have the mentioned before Paul Westhead, Pat Riley tension. We have the Magic versus the team. We have the Norm Nixon unhappy and heard of trade rumors. Any of these storylines sort of stick out to you, or which sort of appeal to you most in terms of we got sort of several different things being woven together with this?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess we just have to decide where to start,
Yeah,
and a lot kind of hangs on what they do with Norm Nixon. Maybe this is a good place to start because there's definitely something here I think is worth talking about, which is how much of this is fabricated.
yeah,
You're hitting on this a little bit last week, in terms of assessing, well, what really happened and what didn't. And I feel like I wanted to say often there's a basis in reality in terms of what happened, and but maybe how it's characterized is creative license. But this seems to be entirely fabricated.
yeah,
um I mean, if there's a basis in reality, as I understand it, there was friction, there was tension, there was, this kind of dissension in the locker room or what have you.
yeah.
But in particular, the bit where Norm Nixon is telling the reporter, no one will know who Magic is in 15 years and all of that. The reporter is a fictional character. The article doesn't exist. What do you think about all of this, Ryan?
Yeah, if you go and look through this, as I know you have, and Hawk, who writes on our site about this show, have done this too. There is no shortage of people trying to find out just how realistic this is, and that any of this actually happened. It turns out that quote, that article, the specific thing that sort of that story revolves around, how unhappy Norm Nixon is, and sort of throwing Magic under the bus, really just never happened. I will say it. Learning that, it sort of took me out of it a little bit, because having followed sports, particularly the NBA, for so long, that just I understand sort of the dramatic necessity of it, but just seems like something a teammate would never ever do to another teammate. And maybe I'm just sort of stretching too far with that. But this was around the sort of a storyline that had to do with trade rumors and potentially Norm Nixon being traded. I don't know. It was certainly, I think, served the purpose, but man, just sort of threw me for a loop once I learned that this never even probably came close to this level of on the record, and that those comments just kind of threw me out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit frustrated. Hawk and I were sitting. I was sitting here and was talking to Hawk. He's writing his article. We were trying to look into who is this reporter. He's named in the credits as Fred Fletcher. We're trying to Google Fred Fletcher, trying to find records of this article. And hoping to do this prior to publishing this article on the episode. And we basically couldn't find anything, so we didn't say anything.
Yeah,
Because I'm sitting here thinking, well, it's 40 years ago. Maybe we just can't find it. Um, and but yeah, it seems to be indicated from various sources that this is fabricated. It does bother me a little bit. I don't know, in terms of what it's a TV show, it's a fictional
yeah.
TV show, so my temptation to say journalistic ethics doesn't quite fit, but something like that feels
Yeah,
a little bit off here. But I mean, then we were also talking about this before we started recording, that the actor playing Norm Nixon is his son. And so I guess we have to presume that Norm's okay with all of this.
I can't see a scenario where his son is not sort of passing him a script saying, "Hey, look what they're saying that you're doing, or that you were responsible for," or
Right?
yeah, that it makes you think, well, maybe that specific thing didn't happen, but perhaps there was some really sort of uncovered tension that was pretty deep that we weren't aware of at the time, or that media never published at the time. It could be
Yeah.
true.
I mean, or maybe there was enough stuff that was like this, and there were some news stories that were feeding into it, and they just weren't this explicit and
Yeah,
and all of that. But yeah, one has to imagine that that Norm's okay with this. At least his son's okay with it.
yeah,
At least he does the portrayal. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting wrinkle when I started thinking about that, because there've been various real life figures who've been upset about how they've been portrayed in the show. from Magic Johnson to Jerry West, who mentioned last week
Yeah.
at one point was threatening a lawsuit. But here you have this entirely fabricated. I think you're right. I mean, it would be shocking
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
for an NBA player to say this about one of his teammates, but it would have been way more shocking 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
mean,
think that, yeah, the media as a device to be used, the media as a weapon, as we said earlier, was I mean, there were only so many outlets you could point to in 1981 and say, okay, this is the way I'm going to get my voice heard, the way I'm going to get my thoughts across. And yeah, to be able to even consider that someone would have done that, this is an episode where they talk about a trade of Norm Nixon for David Thompson, and it falls through. There is, at least in 2023, I can't really speak to 1981, but in 2023, a guy says that about his teammate, he's gone the next day, trade or otherwise.
yeah, I mean, I would think so. Well, you don't know. I mean, you had that whole thing with Jordan Poole and Draymond Green, like they played together for a whole year after that punch. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's where, in certain ways, I feel like it wouldn't be quite as shocking now. You just had, James Harden the other day, call the president of the 76ers a liar, stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
but at least to my recollection, the idea of that kind of um, code of ethics that would hold, I feel like that was stronger, if anything, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
That you're right, particularly when they had apparently been working behind the scenes towards this David Thompson trade. We can talk about a little bit. We can talk about David Thompson a little bit, maybe, which would have been a trade. They would have been trading way Norm Nixon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. If Norm had actually gone to the press and said something that negative about their star player, that they just Jerry Buss would have gotten rid of him.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
mean, I'm almost certain that
Yeah.
that if that had actually happened that explicitly, Buss would have stepped in and said, "I don't care what any of you think. He's out
Yeah.
of here."
So let me ask you. Most of this episode takes place off the court, and I think that's been consistent with what we've seen so far. So we have some action in the game where Magic returns, and the coach waits and sort of proves a point, waits to play him for a while, and then we have the sort of few scenes where the Rockets and Lakers play in this playoff series in 1981. And then the rest of the story is driven by this off the court stuff, the tension there, the things with the family, the things with the press. If you're a fan of the NBA, or your history and sort of how these games go or how these series go, do you almost not care about that stuff and you care more about what happens off the court, or is that what's driving the show? Or I mean, do they even really need the basketball, I guess, is my point in this show.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do. I personally think they balance it quite well.
Yeah.
Whether you know what happened, whether you remember what happened, because there can also be that gray area of like maybe at some level but you haven't refreshed your memory, and
Right.
maybe a lot of people watch the show and avoid refreshing their memories, for this purpose. But yeah, I mean, I agree that it's really the off the court stuff that's the most fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But there isn't a whole lot of on the court stuff in the show, and I do think it's necessary because it's what brings things to a head in a certain way, But I think it's probably balanced about right.
Yeah.
And if they were to make an entire episode that was overly focused on the games,
Yeah.
that would be bad. I think that wouldn't quite work.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you something about this. We established last week that you are a Houston Rockets fan.
Yes.
Right. So episode 2 ends with the Lakers losing in the first round of the playoff,
Yeah.
being upset by the Houston Rockets. Now I realize this maybe a little bit before your conscious awareness.
Right. Right.
I'm not going to ask you how did this land for you when you were like a baby. No, but what I am wondering, given this, is given how the show proceeds really almost entirely through the Lakers' perspective.
Mm-hmm.
How did this land for you?
Yeah.
What I'm saying? Like, as a Rockets fan, we're like, yeah, Rockets, or as a viewer of the show, where you kind of along for the emotional disappointment
Yeah.
that this brings about.
Yeah, my Rockets memories don't really start until the late '80s, when I kind of had a sense of what basketball was and what was going on. I've long ago revisited and reviewed and learned about these series and these games. This was the first of Moses Malone tormenting the Lakers in the playoffs for years to come. But yeah, I mean, I find myself much, much, much more invested in. Yeah, I knew that shot was going to miss, because I knew that the Lakers lost the series. But I'm much more interested in the perspective of how the Lakers see that, view that, what happens in the aftermath of that, than I am about any sort of, here's the actual basketball happening, or my devotion to one team versus the other, or just sort of cheering for this fake Rockets team over this other fake Lakers team. Yeah, I think that to your point, this episode showed it was just the right amount of basketball to balance, or to provide a lens for all that tension that's happening off the court. And so, while I don't get myself caught up really much in the on the court stats and who wins and who loses and all that, it really, this one worked, just as someone that liked to revisit that series, and also something that thought it was a good way to filter through all the tension that happened before.
Oh yeah, I agree. I was curious about that because it's fascinating to me. Also, I've never been a Lakers fan.
Yeah.
I've at various points in my life hated the Lakers. I've I don't know that I wouldn't say I hate them. I don't feel strongly enough anymore.
Yeah.
But there have been points in my life where I was like really shaking my fist at the Lakers, And it's
Well,
interesting how the show puts you in
if
there.
Lakers or Lakers fans were upset about this one, and I know that they were back in 1981, there is a much more heartbreaking thing coming in about 5 years after that, at the hands of the Rockets. So that's probably another season, but we'll get there.
Yeah, again, we speculated about this before, and I do think that would be the plan. Like season three probably go through 87, and then season 4 would be like 88
Yeah.
to 91, something,
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
91, 92. But I have no confirmation for that whatsoever. By the way, that's just
Yeah.
us thinking about how
yeah,
This is me thinking about how I would break apart the story, knowing
exactly.
that this season is set up to circle around to end where it presumably in 1984.
Yeah, we think we know the right way to write the treatments for the upcoming season, so we'll hopefully they consult us.
Yeah. So a couple other things we mentioned: David Thompson. I don't know how much you want to talk about that. Are people aware of David Thompson, the Skywalker? You
Yeah, I
think?
would think so. I mean, a prolific scorer for the Nuggets back in the late '70s, early '80s. I mean, this guy was. I mean, I think they call him Skywalker. I mean, that
Yeah,
was his nickname. This guy
he
was
was a
a
dude.
freak athlete at the time, and I think the thought was, I think maybe the show needs to do a better job pointing this out. Norm Nixon was the point guard for a year or two before Magic.
Yeah.
And he stays in the Lakers for another year or two after this season that we're in right now. So there is certainly this tension of, yeah, let's draft this guy Magic, make him a forward. We got Norm, but no, the team wants to make him a point guard. And so there was a sense of, what do we need 2 point guards for? And you see that article that's called "Life is Number Two," where it talks about Norm Nixon. So the thought was, we've got our point guard of the future. Let's bring in this incredible scorer to complement him. Whereas, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is not even on the back 9, like the back 2 of his career. And this was seen as sort of a no-brainer situation, and I think that we see Jerry West reflect that mindset when he goes
Yeah.
ballistic after this thing falls through. But yeah, David Thompson, if you don't know him, man, go watch those ABA and NBA highlights. Whew, that guy was
For
a
real.
freak.
But it's so, like, yeah, it would have made all the sense in the world. I like thinking about the alternate history here, right? I was looking up some stuff about David Thompson, and you know what? Actually, his career fell right off, right? I
Yep.
mean, like, so he did end up getting traded to Seattle and had a little bit of a bounce back, um, but then injury, drug rehab. I mean, like, looking at it, this probably would not have been a good
Yeah.
plan for the Lakers when it came down to it. It probably would not have worked out. But certainly, it's one of those things at the time. And also, the other thing in this episode we still need to talk about the whole thing with Magic's knee rehab and how Pat Riley, I guess, at least this is how it's portrayed in the show, is keeping it hidden
Yeah.
from everyone else that he's really not 100, you know. Because if he were, you take Jerry West's perspective here, and he's saying, "Well, Magic is back. We don't need Norm anymore. We can go out there with Magic, Kareem, and David Johnson,
Thompson.
David Thompson.
Thompson.
Sorry, David Johnson is different.
Yeah. Michael
Lots
Cooper.
of people are probably named David Johnson.
Yeah.
First that came to mind for me as I made that slip of the tongue was the NFL running back.
Yes,
David
that's
Johnson.
right. Yeah, I mean they would have had Magic, they would have had Thompson, they would have had Michael Cooper, they would have had Jabbar.
Yeah.
So I mean it would have been just a powerhouse team. So I certainly understand the thinking behind why they would have done that.
Yeah. But looking at the actual history, probably would not have been a good plan. I mean, I don't know how exactly this would have fed into further things that happened and James Worthy down the line, and we get too far ahead of ourselves. But
Exactly.
they don't trade for Thompson. They lose in the first round of the playoffs, you know. And then the what's going on with Pat Riley and Paul Westhead, how that comes to a head, and Paul learns that Pat's been keeping secrets from him, and at least in the show, they yell at each other on a plane, but all the players can overhear, and this is just terrible. I don't know how far we want to go with this in terms of what we know, in terms of what happens later. I don't know. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that when you think of Showtime Lakers, you don't think of Paul Westhead. You think of Pat Riley.
You think of Pat
I
Riley.
think that how authentic this storyline was, is another thing we'll probably never know. But Pat Riley saw the potential of Magic, who he could be, that he was the future, and said, "I'm going to sort of hitch my horse to this guy," and he's going to be the one, assuming I can make it work somehow with the guy who's currently coaching. This is the guy who's going to be the one to lead us.
It's interesting, because I mean, I think that their dynamic is really great. I think both Jason Segel and Adrian Brody are doing a great job. I don't know how accurate various things are, of course, but if you watch any of the footage of Paul Westhead and Pat Riley at the time, they're doing a good portrayal. It was pretty spot on. One of the things I think is interesting is that, at least being who I am, I watch this and I'm thinking like, well, Paul's right though. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
He
is right.
We've got the system, and if Magic is not 100% healthy, I need to know that. We keep going along with the system, and so on and so forth. But I guess from a broader point of view, historically, it's very hard to say he was right because of what ends up happening down the line. So it's really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how they handle this whole, this relationship that Riley and Magic are creating, and then how that further influences the wedge that's going to grow between Westhead and Riley. We know that Westhead just, and the history of it is he doesn't last too much longer as the head coach. I don't know how they will portray it in terms of the tension of what happened, and if it's results on the court versus inability to get along off of it. But Riley is almost sort of lighting the spark for the mutiny here a little bit in this stuff with Magic. And I mean, yeah, Westhead is right in this scenario, but Riley has always been a guy, as we know now, that's going to get what he wants, whatever it takes, and that just sort of seems to be the start of it.
Really fascinated by Pat Riley in the show.
Yeah.
Thinking back to season 1 also, and again, how accurate is it? I don't know, but I'm buying it. We'll buy into what's going on here, and we do get a little shout out to Jack McKinney.
That's right.
He won Coach of the Year
Yeah,
his new
which,
gig
which
as a
did which did
DN for the
happen.
Pacers, that did happen. That
Mhm.
news article does exist.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, the off the court stuff's fascinating. Then we have got Jerry Buss, another. I don't know, if fabrication is quite the right word, but apparently the woman that he looks up and goes to see in this episode appears to be at most an amalgamation of real life women, not a particular existing
Yeah.
human being. Honey is
You took the SAT word right out of my mouth. That's the word I was going to use to describe. There is a lot of these women apparently in Jerry Buss's life, and this one sort of becomes the one to represent them and sort of what he's trying to rebuild or put back together as sort of the pieces of his life with his family.
yeah. So Honey Kaplan, not a real person, played by
Right.
Ari Grainer. Um, I don't know. This worked fairly well for me. I don't know. Maybe it's to the extent that I feel like I can relate a little bit to the experience he says he has. He says she was in his dream,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know if you've had this experience. I've had this experience, but then it's always a weird thing of I'm like, well, I dreamed of this woman from my past, and now I want to reach out to her, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't like you probably don't do that and say, I was dreaming about you, you know, which he doesn't do. He's slicker than that.
Yeah, no, he's
Um,
very good. I will say that, I mean, this storyline with Jerry Buss and Honey Kaplan, I thought was an interesting deviation and a look at who Jerry Buss is, or behind the scenes, even behind the scenes of how he's running this team. It landed for me a lot better than the stuff with his kids in this episode. The Monopoly game from episode one is phenomenal. There's sort of how their relationship is cracking and breaking and building all at the same time. I don't know. It just seems like the kids didn't really have anything to do in this episode. It was kind of shoehorned in these storylines with his daughter just popping Rolaids and the son trying to date one of the daughter's tennis prodigies, and I don't know, just didn't sort of quite see how that all fit together.
it definitely seemed he was dating a tennis player, but
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, look, I think when it comes down to it, Genie Bus is a
yeah,
storyline that they are cultivating slowly
yeah,
and have been from the beginning. The Suns, nah.
yeah.
It's just like we have to recognize that these are existing human beings. You know what I mean? But
You have to
they're
keep Jeannie smoldering because she becomes such an integral part later.
yeah, we know why. Yeah, exactly, man. And so yeah, kind of interested to see exactly where they go with Jeannie and how that shapes up and in this portrayal and all of that. So I'm kind of there for that, and you're right though. I mean, I guess the point was to show Jeannie Bus in this episode basically saying, what do you mean, she's not going to play in our tennis tournament thing? Like, I don't even know exactly
Yeah,
what they're doing. Maybe I should look
yeah.
this up.
Some second tier tennis tournament.
Yeah, which of course, like if you are really a professional tennis player, what you care about are you know, the big tournaments,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
whatever they're doing here, in LA. So
We'll probably see more of this where they are positioning Jeannie to take on slightly more and more and more power within the organization, to the point where she, again, I don't remember what her status is in 1991 or whatever it will be that this series ends, but she'll continue to be, I think, framed in that way for a season or two.
yeah, I would think. And again, I'm expecting that if they get a couple more seasons, they primed it to end, 1991, 1992, or something like that. I'm not sure how successful the show is from HBO's point of view. If they wanted to continue on, they
Yeah,
certainly could decide to kind of jump from the end of this era and, proceed into the Kobe Shaq era.
right.
They could do that, you know. Um, but I don't really foresee it happening personally, but it's possible.
Yeah, certainly possible. But for now, I think they're doing a great job framing this and putting us in 1981 or whatever the time frame is, and showing us, what this team could have been like. Certainly, as we've talked about, some creative takes there, but it continues to be fascinating through 2 episodes this year.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that about does it. You have anything else you want to say about episode 2 here?
No, that's it. Next week, next Sunday night, will be episode 3, where I guess we'll see the aftermath of this loss in the 1981 playoffs and what happens in the seasons that follow.
Yeah, I'm curious where they'll pick up. We'll see.
Yeah.
Will they pick up in the aftermath, directly, or will it already be, on the cusp of the next season? Or we'll see exactly how that goes. But certainly, I'm looking forward to it. We'll be back next week to talk about season 2, episode 3 of Winning Time, along with our usual banter at the beginning, hitting on news and notes about things in the world and what we're watching and all that good stuff. Well, thank everyone for listening. Check out tvobsessive.com if you want to read things. You can follow the site on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TV Obsessive. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm just going to say Twitter, by the way.
Yep.
I'm at Caemeron CC. Ryan's at Cable Box Score.
Yeah, and anywhere that you get your podcast, you can find us. We'd love for you to rate us, write a review, share us with your friends, and thanks everybody for listening. Looking forward to picking back up next week.
All right, Ryan, sounds good. Oh, and you check out the YouTube channel too. Go look at TV Obsessive on YouTube. Subscribe and like and all that good stuff. And all right, we'll see you next week.
Okay, till next time.
All right.